Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
The U.S. makes a deal with the devil. I'm Jason Miller. Tonight on the Evan Miller Report, an outline agreement on the future shape of Iran's nuclear program has been reached after what some say have been marathon talks with the six major powers in Switzerland. We have the latest on that, plus Israel's response to the decision on that possible deal today. Also on tonight's Evan Miller Report, up to 150 people are killed by terrorists in Kenya's Garcia University. We have the latest on the attack and who was the majority group that was killed in that attack. In Yemen, Houthi rebels and their allies have stormed the presidential palace in Aden. Iraqi forces which retook Tikrit have found burial sites Wednesday believed to hold victims of the June massacre. And we have the highlights of tonight's Prime Minister's debates in London. The ITV Prime Minister's debates here on SHR earlier today. We have all those stories and more. Plus, Corey Evans.
Jay, the missing black box from the Germanwings plane crash has been found. That and Mother Russia has experienced a 21st century Titanic. Well, almost. Florida prison workers, that is, tied to the KKK? This can't be real. No way. Oh, but it is. Philly airport workers are on strike, but has it affected travel? Not so much. Today, in lawsuits across America, we take on a broad range in our continuing battle against global socialism. And guess who's poking and prodding Letterman to go into Senate politics? You'll find out tonight on your conservative news source. The Evan Miller Report starts now.
Live from Southern California, this is the Evan Miller Report. Jason Miller with news and politics, Corey Evans with business and entertainment. This is the Evan Miller Report on SHR Media and Public Press Radio. Here now, Jason Miller.
And a very good evening on this Thursday, April the 2nd, 2015. I'm Jason Miller, along with Corey Evans this evening, and it's good to be back with you from our coverage earlier in the evening as we brought you the Prime Minister's debates here on SHR earlier in the evening. We'll have much more on those debates between those seven party leaders over in the UK later in the program. But first, ladies and gentlemen, we start off tonight in Switzerland, where an outline agreement on the future shape of Iran's nuclear program has been reached. Under the deal, Iran will reduce its uranium enrichment capacity in exchange for phased sanctions relief. President Obama said, quote, "It was a historic understanding that had been reached with Iran. The world powers and Iran now aim to draft a comprehensive nuclear accord which is expected to be signed by June the 30th of this year." The framework agreement was announced by the EU and Iran after 8 days of negotiations in Louisiana. The talks between the so-called P5+1, the US, UK, France, China, and Russia, plus Germany, and Iran at Louisiana's Beau Rivage Palace Hotel continue beyond the original self-imposed deadline of March the 31st. After missing the deadline and what some say were two exhausting nights of negotiations, Iran and the six world powers presented their framework as a major achievement. But not all agree. The EU's top diplomat Federica Mogherini read out a joint statement outlining the main points, including a reduction in the number of Iran's operating centrifuges, changes to its nuclear facilities, and a promise to lift sanctions if these steps are verified. This is an unwritten understanding, not a formal agreement, and it lays the foundation for very tough negotiations on the details. but for now, it articulates our celebrating a hard-won, potentially historic achievement. And, ladies and gentlemen, we have received word tonight that people on the streets of Tehran are cheering for joy tonight. Don't know whether that's good cheering or the bad cheering for America, but, ladies and gentlemen, in this newsman's humble opinion, I have a feeling it's cheering against America tonight. But because I believe we lost being the freest nation in the world tonight by allowing this deal to go forward. Meanwhile, Israel's intelligence minister, Stendes, has said today that all options, including military action, were now on the table in the face of the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. Speaking to public radio, as the talks on Iran's nuclear program continued in Switzerland, Stein said Israel would seek to counter any threat through diplomacy and intelligence, but said, if we have no choice, we have no choice. The military option is on the table. Asked about possible U.S. objections to Israeli military action, Stenz pointed out to Israel's unilateral attack against the Osgri nuclear reactor in Saddam Hussein's Iraq back in 1981. He said this operation was not carried out in agreement with the U.S. Stein's a close ally of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the Israeli leader had left no doubt as to the country's response to a nuclear-armed Iran. The Prime Minister has said clearly that Israel will not allow Iran to become a nuclear power, Stein said. And ladies and gentlemen, it is Israel now we have to look to protect our interest from Iran developing a nuclear weapon. I hate to say that we can't back up our own people here at home, but if President Obama's recent comments today said anything, it looks like he's full in for this deal. So it looks like we have to depend on Israel, and whether Israel decides to bomb Iran this year or in 5 years, the countdown has begun whether or when Israel will bomb Iran. And that's this newsman's opinion. That's a wrap on our Iran coverage. By the way, we will be posting a link of the details of this supposed deal with Iran on our Facebook page from our sister news affiliation, the Pundit Press. Dan Butcher did a great job in putting up everything that was agreed to in the talks over in Switzerland, and that's now available up on our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Evan Miller Report, for your viewing pleasure tonight. Over to Kenya now, where the number of people killed by al-Shabaab militants in an attack on a university in northeastern Kenya has risen to 147, according to government officials. The operation to secure the Gasri University College campus was now over, with all 4 attackers killed. Some 587 students had escaped, 79 of whom were injured. The gunmen were wearing suicide vests, according to the reports, and were armed with AK-47s. Interior Minister Joseph Narasi said the militants exploded like bombs as the siege ended. According to the AP, some officers were wounded by shrapnel. It's not clear if the attackers deliberately detonated the explosives as police approached, or if they went off automatically after being hit by gunfire. An overnight curfew is now being implemented in parts of the country. 4 countries near the Kenya-Somalia border, Garsra, Warsaw, Madura, and Tanya River, would have dusk-to-dawn curfews imposed, disaster management officials said. 9 critically injured students were airlifted to the capital, Nairobi, for treatment, they added, but each student has been accounted for by the end of the evacuation. Masked gunmen stormed the university early this morning and took hostages. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon condemned what he called a terrorist attack and said the UN was ready to help Kenya prevent and counter terrorism and violent extremism. Meanwhile, the U.S. said it was offering Nairobi assistance to take on al-Shabaab and would continue to work with others in the region to take on the group. According to the BBC's Somalia service reporter, Mr. Kuno, who was a headmaster at an Islamic school in Garissa before he quit. Mohammed Kuno, a high-ranking al-Shabaab official, was the mastermind of the attack. Kenyan's President Yuri Cañedo offered his condolences to families of the victims and ordered urgent steps to ensure police recruits could begin training immediately. We suffered unnecessarily due to a shortage of security personnel, he said. Earlier, the Al-Shabaab terrorist group told the BBC its members were holding Christians hostage and freeing Muslims. The gunmen then reportedly ordered students to lie down on the floor, but some of them escaped. Student Auguste Elgay told the BBC's Newsday program it was horrible, there was shooting everywhere. He said it was pathetic that the university was only guarded by 2 police officers. Student Collins Wenja said the gunmen entered his hostel. He could hear them opening doors and asked the people inside whether they were Muslims or Christians, the AP news agency reported. He said, if you were a Christian, you were shot on the spot with a blast of the gun. I thought I was going to die. Kenyan troops entered Somalia back in October 2011 in an effort to stop the Islamists from crossing the long, porous border between the 2 countries and kidnapping people. But their presence achieved the opposite effect, provoking what they say Al-Shabaab to increase its activity in Kenya, according to the BBC's correspondent. So another tragic day in Kenya, another tragic day in Africa today, as terrorists once again control the political landscape. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a Christian, so it hits me personally when Christians of this nature are shot in the head by the likes of terrorists. Don't you agree, Corey Evan?
Yes, absolutely. Absolute chaos going on over there, and we're going to cover every minute of it, it looks like.
Absolutely right. All right, folks, moving on to Yemen tonight, where Houthi rebels and their allies in Yemen have stormed now the presidential palace in Aden following heavy clashes. The rebels pushed through to the heart of the port city using tanks and armored vehicles despite airstrikes by a Saudi-led coalition. At least 44 people have been killed in the violence, including 18 civilians, according to the AFP news agency. Separately, a Saudi border guard has reportedly been killed by gunfire. It is the first known Saudi fatality since it began an air campaign against the Houthis last week. The Saudi government says the aim of the operation in Yemen is to protect President Abdul Mansur Hadi's legitimate government. It says it has no plans to deploy ground forces for now. Aden was President Hadi's last seat of power before he fled to Saudi Arabia last week as the Shia rebels advanced on the city. Over to Iraq now, where Iraqi forces, which retook Tikrit from the Danish group, found burial sites yesterday believed to hold victims of a June massacre in which hundreds of army cadets were executed. The site for a massacre, named after the nearby base from which the mostly Shiite recruits were abducted, stoked widespread anger against Daesh and helped rally support to battle the jihadists. Interior Minister Mohammed El-Giban told the AFP news agency that a burial site had been discovered in a freshly retaken palace complex on the banks of the Tigris River. He was speaking at a concrete waterfront post of the Tikrit's water police building, where the wall was stained by blood that had run down into the river. The place reminds us of those who were unjustly killed. It reminds us of the massacre, Giban said, sobbing. They were innocent people. Today the cowards were defeated. We will hunt them down wherever they are. We will bring security and peace to all of Iraq, he said. Back here at home, the FBI says it has arrested 2 women accused of plotting to plant a bomb in the U.S. The 2 women, who are U.S. citizens, referred to themselves as citizens of the Islamic State or Daesh, according to court documents. Noel Valdez and Asia Siddiqui were until recently roommates living in the Queens section of New York City. Mr. Siddiqui had several gas tanks and instructions on turning them into bombs, the document said. Ms. Siddiqui had repeatedly contacted with members of the foreign terrorist organization Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, according to the documents. Her accomplice, Ms. Valdez, referred to Osama bin Laden as her hero, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. The defendants allegedly plotted to wreak terror by creating explosive devices and even researching the pressure cooker bombs used during the Boston Marathon bombing, said the assistant director in Charcho Diego Rodriguez of the FBI's New York field office. The Justice Department said the two women had plotted to build an explosive device since at least August of last year and then studied chemistry and electricity. They did not have a specific target, but at one point considered Herald Square in Manhattan, according to the court documents. Back out internationally, military courts in Pakistan have sentenced 6 men to death in their first verdict since being announced after the Peshawar school massacre. Pakistan's army chief said the 6 men to be hanged were hardcore terrorists involved in a heinous acts of terror, manslaughter, and suicide bombing. A 7th got life in jail. The men were named, but no further details have been given. That's given, not given, ladies and gentlemen. They have the right to appeal. Critics oppose ceding power to the army and say suspects' rights are at risk. The authorities say the purpose of the courts is to try terrorism suspects speedily. They have dismissed warnings that there is danger the courts will lead to summary and selective justice as misconceptions. The military was given the power to try terror suspects as part of plans to tackle insurgents after the Peshawar massacre. All right, folks, I'll be back in a couple minutes with highlights of tonight's Prime Minister Leaders Showdown in Salford City in the UK. But for now, I'll send it over to Corey Evan, who will wrap up tonight's international news headlines with headlines out of Germany with that German Wings flight, plus a Russian trawler going down. Corey, take it away.
You got it, Jay. First up from CNN, analysis of a tablet device belonging to German Wings Flight 9525 co-pilot Andris Lubitz shows he researched suicide methods on the internet in the days leading up to the crash, a German prosecutor said Thursday. Dusseldorf prosecutor Christoph said that on one day, Lubitz also searched for several minutes with search terms relating to cockpit doors and their security measures. Police analysis of the correspondence and search history on the device retrieved from Lubitz's Dusseldorf apartment demonstrated that the co-pilot used it from March 16th to March 23rd, Kumpa said. The search history was not deleted and also revealed searches concerning medical treatment, the prosecutor said. Lubitz is suspected of deliberately bringing down German Wings Flight 9525 in the French Alps on March 24th. Noting he's made a criminal request to German authorities but is for now conducting his own investigation, the prosecutor in Marseille said he is tasked with involuntary homicide investigation. But prosecutor Bryce Robin noted that Lubitz made voluntary actions such as guiding the plane toward the mountain and reducing its speed to prevent alarms from going off, and was alive and conscious to the very end. A European government official with detailed knowledge of the investigation said that Lubitz's actions amount to premeditated murder. While cautioning that there are still many holes in understanding Lubitz's motivation, the disclosures about his internet searches showed that he planned to do what he was going to do, according to the official. And as authorities tried to figure out what was on Lubitz's electronics, they got another big break about what happened inside Airbus A320 this Airbus A320 that went down, and that would be its flight data recorder. The cockpit voice recorder was located shortly after the plane crashed, and now investigators have both black boxes, as they're called, and the details they might provide. A female police officer digging by hand for clothes in a ravine that had been searched previously found the flight data recorder on Thursday afternoon about 8 inches below the surface, according to Robin. Normally, white with fluorescent orange, the discovered recorder lived up to its name as a black box because fire had darkened it with ashes. Even with this damage, the Marseille prosecutor said that investigators should be able to get useful info out of it. It's just one of many items uncovered at the crash site in the southern French Alps. Authorities have found 470 personnel effects there, according to Robin. That number includes 40 cell phones, but all those were badly damaged. Robin cast doubt that any useful info could be retrieved from those phones, given their condition. But if anything comes up from those phones that is relevant, we will bring them to you in a future report or on our Facebook page, facebook.com/The Evan Miller Report. And a Russian trawler has sunk off the Kamchatka peninsula with 54 sails so far confirmed dead. 63 people have been rescued, many suffering from hypothermia, according to officials in Russia's Far East, but 15 are reported missing. The Dalny Vostok freezer trawler had 132 people on board when it sank. 78 of those on board were Russian and 42 were from Myanmar. The remainder were from Vanuatu, Latvia, and Ukraine. The Dalny Vostok went down in the south of Okhotsk, about 200 miles west of Krotogorsky settlement at around 6:30 local time. The captain was reported to be among the dead, and a captain of one of the 26 rescue ships taking part in the search said weather conditions were poor when the trawler went down, with snow, wind, and waves of up to 3 meters high. The water temperature was around the freezing point of 32 degrees. The spokesman said survival in such waters was possible for up to 20 minutes. Water flooded the engine compartment, and the trawler then sank within 15 minutes, a local branch of the Russian emergency. The most likely theory, according to Russian investigators, is that the trawler may have hit some sort of obstacle because of damage near its engine room. Emergency services suggested that drifting ice may have holed the vessel, but a senior official in Kamchatka was quoted by a TASS news agency as saying the boat foundered while trawling a 100-ton dragnet. Sergei Kabarov said that the safety rules might have been flouted with cargo limits being exceeded. The ship didn't send out a distress call before sinking, according to local media. The 15 people who are still missing are thought to have been in the ship's hold as the trawler sank, reported TASS. Man, before I send it back to Jay and what we've got out of Britain, I must say this is one of those disasters that anything that could go wrong did go wrong. Sounds like Murphy's Law, doesn't it, Jay? So to speak.
Certainly does, Corey, certainly does. Tragedy out in the Russian seas today. Sounds tragic enough. Thank you very much for that, Corey. All right, folks. You heard him earlier today here on the SHR Media Network. It was the UK Prime Minister's debate, where 7 leaders went head-to-head in the only debate showdown that current Prime Minister and Conservative David Cameron and Labour leader Ed Miliband would be facing each other. And as the ITV News' Chris Ship reports, they were like insurgent speedboats racing around the bigger tankers. Here's Chris's report.
Last time there were 3, this time 7. Party leaders with much to prove and tonight much to do in an election which hasn't been this close in more than 40 years.
7 party leaders go face to face live in the ITV Leaders Debate.
And first out of the traps tonight, the very first to speak, a perhaps understandably nervous-looking leader of the Greens.
Other parties trade in fear. Fear of immigrants, demonising people on benefits. But to build a decent, humane society, we start with hope.
We have a positive alternative. Let's have a trade deal with Europe. Let's cooperate with them as friends, but make our own laws. And let's take back control of our borders.
Nick Clegg started his statement with an admission.
I'm not even going to pretend that I haven't made mistakes. I have. I put my hands up when I have, and I've learned from them. But what you will get from me and from the Liberal Democrats is this: the grit and the resilience to finish the job.
And from the SNP leader, a statement perhaps of the obvious.
I won't pretend I don't want Scotland to be independent. I do. But as long as Scotland remains part of the Westminster system, the SNP will seek to work with others of like mind across the UK.
Now tonight you're going to hear a lot of people claiming a lot of things. But please remember, these are the same people who claimed that if we followed our plan, unemployment would go up, that the deficit wouldn't come down, the economy wouldn't grow.
Plaid Cymru offers an alternative. We offer hope for a decent future for our young people.
And the last opening statement, Ed Miliband, attempting to paint himself as the next Prime Minister.
For 5 years, wages haven't kept up with bills. For 5 years, the NHS has been going backwards. For 5 years, our young people have been fearing they'll have a worse life than their parents.
And then the gloves came off. First question, public spending. First assault from Nick Clegg to the man with whom he shared power for 5 years.
When I hear the Conservatives talk about the choice between competence and chaos, just imagine, David Cameron, the chaos in people's lives, the people who in the NHS don't know whether you're going to find the money, the people who don't know whether their nursery or their college or their schools are going to close. That's why Johnny's right. You need to take a balanced approach.
Nick is wrong about our plans because, of course, we are going to raise $5 billion from tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance as we've done in this Parliament. And that's part of the balanced plan that also involves putting more money into our NHS and cutting taxes for working people. But here, the very wealthy include some of the tax avoiders and evaders.
It's really ironic, isn't it, hearing Nick Clegg and David Cameron argue when they've been hand in glove imposing austerity on the people of this country for the last 5 years.
You've been balancing the books on the backs of the poor. 79,000...
No, we've actually done it in a balanced way.
The books aren't balanced. We've got a 90 billion deficit. I mean, what's going on here? Can we get real, please?
And then Ed Miliband started using a phrase Ronald Reagan used to great effect many years ago. There you go again.
There you go again. You can't talk about the present and you can't talk about the future, so you want to talk about the past. I think people at home will want to know, what are we going to do for them in the next 5 years?
What I'm hearing is more debt and more taxes, more debt and more taxes, a lot more debt and more taxes.
You probably by now get the point. Next came a question about the future of the NHS, and Nigel Farage, true to style, took a risk. He might regret he did.
OK, here's a fact. And I'm sure the other people will be mortified that I dare to talk about it. There are 7,000 diagnoses in this country every year for people who are HIV positive, which is not a good place for any of them to be, I know. But 60% of them are not British nationals.
This kind of scaremongering rhetoric is dangerous.
It's a fact.
It's dangerous, it divides communities and it creates stigma to people who are ill, and I think you ought to be ashamed of yourself.
Well, I'm sorry, we've got to put our own people first.
When somebody is diagnosed with a dreadful illness, my instinct is to view them as a human being, not consider what country they come from.
Remember, though, Nigel Farage has made a political career out of saying things others are not prepared to say. The NHS is the issue on which the Labour leader was most comfortable. And it showed.
I would say to everybody at home that use your vote at this election as a weapon to fight for the future of our National Health Service, because it needs to be rescued from you, David.
What about mid-staffs?
Because I've got to say, over 13 years, the Labour government transformed an NHS from 18-month waiting to 18-week waiting. That's our record.
Ed Miliband is simply wrong on the figures. There are more nurses, more doctors, more people being treated, and that's because we have a strong economy.
And to make our NHS more efficient, to deal with some of its problems, what we need to do is take the whole market mechanism out of the NHS. Nick Clegg.
Well, look, we've heard lots of warm words here about the NHS. Of course, we all love the NHS, but the NHS doesn't need warm words. It needs hard cash.
Next, it was immigration.
In Europe, as we all know, has made it perfectly clear you can negotiate lots of things over the next couple of years, but you cannot renegotiate the free movement of peoples within the European Union. Do you accept or not that in your renegotiation, free movement is not up for discussion?
I don't accept that. Nigel is basically saying, give up before you've begun. In fact, if you look at my track record on Europe, I said we cut the European budget. People said it was impossible. We cut that European budget. So instead of giving up, let's get stuck in and negotiate. And the problem with Nigel in the end is ultimately, Nigel, you're just the back door to a Labour government.
Different this debate certainly was, but was it vote deciding? Chris Shipp, ITV News, at the leaders' debate.
I defend all of the decisions.
And we thank Chris Shipp for that report. And how did the voters respond to this? Well, a YouGov poll of 1,100 people gave a clear victory to the SNP leader, Nicola Sturgeon, with 28%, followed by UKIP leader Nigel Farage on 20%. David Cameron, 18%. Mr. Miliband on 15%. Mr. Clegg, 10%. All the remaining candidates got polling numbers of below 10%. But a Comres poll done for ITV, the provider who provided the debates live on television in the UK tonight, said it made a dead heat between Mr. Cameron, Mr. Miliband, Mr. Farage, and Ms. Sturgeon. Although Mr. Cameron came out on top on the question of who was capable of leading the country. Mr. Miliband was judged best performer in an ICM poll for The Guardian, taking 25% of the support, just ahead of David Cameron on 24%. According to the BBC's political editor, Nick Robinson, he says there was no game changer, no single moment, no zinger, no gaffe which looks set to reshape the course of this election, save perhaps for one, he says. That was the presence on the stage of not 2 or 3 party leaders, but 7, a debate in which the talk of a new sort of politics, multi-party politics, became visibly reality. If that gives a boost for UKIP's Farage with his laser focus on immigration and his attack on the Westminster parties, as the early instant polls suggest, it will worry the Tories. If it also promotes Natalie Bennett's Green Party or Nicola Sturgeon's SNP or Leanne Wood's Plain Cymru Party from Wales after their assault on austerity, it will frighten Labour. The consequence could be an outcome more unpredictable and more uncertain than any election for years. And ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned to the SHR Media Network. When Election Day comes up in the UK on May the 7th, we will be here to bring to you the live results coming in from the UK. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and take an ad break here at this particular point. When we come back on tonight's program this evening, in political news tonight, President Obama's Attorney General picks up a game by the President Democrat. We'll tell you who the new GOP backer is tonight in D.C. In national politics, the state of South Carolina has taken aim at union bullies in a Boeing labor vote. And Corey Evan has the latest in what's going on in business tonight and global socialism.
Yes, McDonald's workers are getting a raise of $1 an hour, so they should be grateful, especially if they work the one at the Philadelphia airport. I'll explain that. In lawsuits across America, we talk about sex changes on the taxpayer's dime, more stink from El Ciudad de Marihuana, and assisted suicide. Wait a minute, this sounds a bit to me like global socialism. And with that, Hollywood is calling on David Letterman to rescue us. In what way, you may ask? You'll find out after the break. You're listening to SHR Media.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Is radio. Talk news. Talk news. Radio. Talk news. Talk news. Radio.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
How you doing? John Grant here. When I'm not slaving over a hot microphone on the 405radio.com Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern, I check out Sean and Clint here at Sackheads Radio. We all appreciate the best political bloggers, writers, and commentators. We either get them on our shows or we make fun of them, as it should be. So check us out live Saturdays at 10 a.m. Eastern or forever on the podcasts on the 405radio.com.
This is Tammy Jackson, inviting you to join me on the Tammy Jackson Show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific on the 405radio.com. Put down that remote and tune into the show that covers politics, guns and the Second Amendment, religious liberties, sanctity of life, the military, and more. I host newsworthy guests and work hard to be a conservative radio show that's not like all the others. So save Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific for me, Tammy Jackson, on the 405media.com.
Hello, I'm Paul, a student at Hillsdale College. Here is my professor, Dr. Larry Arnn, on the separation of church and state.
America's founders believed in the separation of church and state, in that the country was not to have an official religion or an official sect. But that did not mean that government was to be hostile to religion, or even indifferent to religion, as many today argue. In fact, America's founding document, the Declaration of Independence, includes both a reference to God as the author of the laws of nature and a confident assertion that human beings are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Far from being hostile or indifferent to religion, America's founders understood the theology of the Declaration to be an essential part of the education of citizens.
This Constitution Minute was brought to you by Hillsdale College. To join the national conversation on the Constitution, go to constitutionminute.org.
Hi, this is Rooster from Outcry Radio. Catch me here on Blog Talk Radio every Saturday night at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or follow my blog. Now, back to the Sackheads.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.
Here's radio. Hack news. Hack news. Hack news. Hack news. Hack news. Hack news. Hack news.
That's the closing bell. You know what that means. Business report time on the Evan Miller Report. I'm Corey Evan. Jason Miller will be back in just a few short moments. But first, the Dow is up 65 points at 17,763. The Nasdaq gained 6 points at 48.86, and the S&P gained 7 points at 20.66. Sort of progress after the past 2 days, but I digress. The U.S. trade deficit shrank in February to the lowest level in more than 5 years as a labor dispute at West Coast ports contributed to the weakest reading on purchases from abroad since 2011. The gap, which measures the difference in the value between imports and exports, narrowed by $7 billion to $35.4 billion, lower than the lowest forecast of economists surveyed by Bloomberg, and the smallest since October 2009, according to the Commerce Department today in Washington. Imports contracted 4.4%, the biggest slump since February 2009 when the economy was still in recession. The logjam of ships waiting to unload foreign-made goods at West Coast ports will soon dissipate as the worker dispute has been resolved, which means that imports will probably again flood into the U.S. Meanwhile, a stronger dollar, which makes American-made goods more expensive to customers overseas, means exports will remain muted, causing the deficit to swell. According to Bloomberg, lines at state employment agencies last week were about as short as they've been in 15 years, adding to evidence of persistent labor market strength that's boosting American spirits. Indeed, applications for unemployment benefits dropped by 20,000 to 268,000 in the second days ended March 28th, the second lowest since April 2000, according to Labor Department figures to Thursday in Washington. Bloomberg's Consumer Comfort Index advanced a third straight week, approaching the highest reading since July 2007. Jobless claims that have declined since the end of February indicate employers remain upbeat, quote-unquote, about the economy's prospects after a recent slowdown in sales. A report Friday may show almost 250,000 jobs were added last month, helping explain why households are feeling better about their finances and laying the groundwork for a rebound in spending. But of course, I take that with a grain of salt. A few dozen baggage handlers, airplane cleaners, and other non-union workers went on strike today at Philadelphia's airport, demanding higher wages, benefits, and an end to what they say are unfair labor practices. Workers who say they make as little as $7.25 an hour are picketed at Philadelphia International Airport starting early today. They want their employers, airline contractors, Prospect Airport Services, and Prime Flight Airline Services to comply with a living wage law passed last year that requires pay of $10.88 or more per hour at city-owned facilities. They're also calling for affordable health and sick days. The strike didn't affect airport operations, spokeswoman Diane Jarrus said. Prospect said eligible employees are already given an opportunity to enroll in affordable health coverage through the company, and that employees will soon receive paid sick leave under a recent city ordinance. It said it's unaware of any unfair labor practice. Prime Flight didn't immediately return messages Thursday. Service Employees International Union has been trying to organize workers at Philadelphia and at other eastern airports, including Pittsburgh, Newark, and Kennedy. And McDonald's is once again a target for criticism, this time for giving raises to 90,000 of its hourly wage workers. What gives? Critics charge that the vast majority of McDonald's workers will not see the higher wages, according to CNN Money. Effective July 1st, starting wages at 1,500 McDonald's-owned restaurants will be at least $1 an hour more than the minimum wage set by local law. Employees up to restaurant managers will get a pay bump, and if they've worked at least a year, they also get paid time off. But 90% of McDonald's workers are employed by independently owned franchisees, and the plan would not apply to them. Critics are now calling on McDonald's to offer all its workers better pay and benefits. Fast food workers in New York plan to protest the new pay policy outside a McDonald's location later today. McDonald's CEO Steve writing an op-ed in the Chicago Tribune and releasing a similarly worded full-page ad in several newspapers today. Quote, I understand that some may believe it doesn't go far enough, writes Easterbrook. These actions demonstrate meaningful progress, and this is what we can do right now in our company-owned stores. Easterbrook, who's been on the job for less than 3 months, described the plan to raise pay for workers at company stores as an initial step. He said the company remains committed to reviewing the total employment experience that they offer their people. And he said raising workers' wages is part of a plan to make McDonald's a modern, progressive burger company. Yeah, that word progressive, that just says more nonsense to me, at least.
Me, and me.
Where's the beef in there?
There's no beef. It's just a bunch of me.
Ah, yeah. So definitely it's pink slime.
Ooh, wow. Ding, ding towards the beef companies on that one, ladies and gentlemen.
Unfortunately,
David Muir did a good job on that segment, didn't he?
Yes. And although I'm sure that most companies will say that they don't use because, as you know previously, there were rumors, at least, of companies using pink slime to sanitize meat that would otherwise be used for dog food.
Nasty. All
exactly.
Right, folks. Let's not discuss our West Coast listeners, as they are in the middle of the dinner hour, and we don't want the kids barfing up their dessert over on the East Coast, I'm sure. So
because it's cheesecake tonight.
Oh, see, he's getting me hungry with the cheese. You can't forget the cheese. All right,
yes.
Corey Evan with the business news. Thank you very much for that. All right, some political news just briefly before we send it back over to Corey with our global socialism segment tonight. President Obama's choice of Loretta Lynch to be the next U.S. Attorney General got a boost today from an unlikely source. Republican Senator Mark Kirk. He announced today his support, possibly providing a crucial 51st vote for the embattled nominee. He said, quote, I am confident from my conversation with Loretta Lynch that she will be a valuable partner in confronting the gang violence that is robbing families of their children every day in Chicago in the state of Illinois, he said in a statement. All 44 Senate Democrats and 2 independents are expected to vote for Lynch, who would be the first African-American woman to lead the Justice Department, taking over outgoing Justice Department head Eric Holder. Over to South Carolina now, where their governor, Nikki Haley, considered the bid to unionize workers at Boeing Co.'s North Charleston plant a threat to one of her state's corporate crown jewels, and she is turning to radio, speeches, and social media to denounce the campaign. She said, quote, we don't need their bully middleman tactics between our associations and their associates, and their employer, she wrote on Twitter last month. It was a message in keeping with Haley's precious declarations that she is a union buster who wears high heels to kick out organized labor thugs seeking to gain a foothold in the state. The April 22nd union vote at the aircraft maker's 787 Dreamliner factory in the state could offer Haley a chance to burnish her conservative credentials at a time when potential GOP contenders for the White House court her ahead of South Carolina's early primary in 2016. If she stands up to Boeing's biggest union, the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers Union, and wins, it could enhance the second-term governor prospects for higher office, according to some political experts. That could include a cabinet post in a future GOP administration, a national party leadership position, or even a vice presidential running mate in 2016. Her anti-union position very much bolsters her with conservatives around the country, said South Carolina-based Republican strategist Chip Foucault. All right, folks, it's now time for our continuing battle, as we like to call it, Corey Evan?
Global socialism.
Oh, yeah. And tonight's Global Socialism segment starts over international tonight, over in Australia, where officials have placed shock over reports at a Canberra school, which built a cage-like structure in the classroom for a child with special needs. Yeah, you heard it right when I said a cage. Officials said the entirely inappropriate structure was used as a withdrawal space for the child. The school principal has been placed on administrative duties, and local education minister Joy Bird said she had ordered a full inquiry into the incident. Australia media said the child in question was 10 and had autism. The structure was reported to measure 2 meters by 2 meters and was made of pool fencing. Ms. Bird said she was made aware of the reports last week after someone at the school raised the alarm. The space was put up in March and has since been taken down, she said. Words cannot put into place my absolute disappointment and horror that anyone in our schools would consider a structure of this nature in any way, shape, or form to be acceptable, she told reporters. Education experts say children with autism or behavioral needs can benefit from having a quiet place in which they do their work or to calm down if they become agitated. But the Director General of the ACT Education and Training Directorate, Diana Joseph, said the Canberra school's decision was entirely inappropriate and unacceptable and raises too many questions. This is not how our school students should be treated, she said. Over to California now. Here back home, the state can remove an out-of-control child from the custody of a parent even if a mother or father is not to blame for the child's behavior. This coming from a California appeals court today. If children face substantial risk of harming themselves, it doesn't matter whether the parent did anything intentional to put them in that position, the Second District Court of Appeal ruled. When a child thereby faces a substantial risk of serious physical harm, a parent's inability to supervise or protect a child is enough by itself to invoke the juvenile court's dependency jurisdiction, the court said in its 3-0 ruling. The court disagreed with other state appellate court that in 2010 said that a parent had to be shown to be culpable for a failure or inability to supervise or protect a child. Such conflicts between appeals courts are often resolved by the state Supreme Court, which would be here in California. Thursday's ruling came in case of a Los Angeles County mother whose teen daughter repeatedly ran away from home and had a child at the age of 15. The appellate court said the girl remained incorrigible despite her mother's best efforts, which included looking for her each time she left home, sending her to live with her grandparents, and calling the police and Los Angeles County Department of Children and Family Services for help. The mother was identified in court papers only as Lisa E., their daughter as RT. And now I'll send it over to my colleague Corey Evan up in Los Angeles to close out tonight's Global Socialism segment.
And this time it's all involving our Lawsuits Across America segment. So, do we have that theme, Jay?
Yes, we have that theme, sir.
And now it's time for Lawsuits Across America. The cases are real. All rise for the Honorable Corey Evan.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, please be seated and come to order. Global socialism lawsuits are now in session. A federal judge has ordered California's Corrections Department to provide a transsexual inmate with sex change surgery, the first time such an operation has been ordered in the state, according to KCRA Sacramento. Yeah, I know, right? Jay? U.S. District Judge John Tigar in San Fran ruled today that denying sex reassignment surgery to 51-year-old Michelle Lyle Norsworthy violates her constitutional rights. Her birth name is Jeffrey Brian Norsworthy. The ruling said it would be the second time nationwide that such surgery has been performed on an inmate, in apparent reference to an inmate who castrated himself in Texas, then was given the surgery out of necessity. Corrections officials say they are considering whether to appeal the ruling. A spokeswoman for the federal receiver who controls California prison medical care says the surgery could cost taxpayers nearly, wait for it, $100,000.
$100,000? That's baloney. It doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah, and I'm thinking the only way that they can get away with paying for that sort of thing is to go on Wheel of Fortune and win it all back. But, of course, that would involve a whole bunch of nonsense, which would probably cost.
I think what Corey is trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, it's a cockamamie proposal. Am I right or am I right, Corey? Okay, looks like we lost Corey Evan up in our LA Bureau. Let's see if we can get him back here. All right, we lost him. I'm sorry to say we lost Corey Evan at that point. Well, that story, ladies and gentlemen, to me is very, very disturbing to me that now we have to provide. And I think we got Corey Evan back, so just a moment. Let's press this button here. Yes, here we go. We got him back. So,
yeah, as I was trying to tell you, 2 new complaints were filed in recent weeks and affect cultivation centers with permits in southwestern Illinois and Cook County. In one, a competitor claims a permit was issued improperly to Progressive Treatment Solutions before the company had secured required zoning approval in East St. Louis. A company called Madison County Labs filed the lawsuit challenging Progressive's permit. In the other, unsuccessful applicant Medponics Illinois has sued the Illinois Department of Agriculture and Bedford Grow, a permit winner in Chicago. Messages seeking comment from Progressive and Bedford Grow were not immediately returned. There are now 4 separate medical marijuana lawsuits that named the Department of Agriculture as a defendant. And Dan Swangard knows what death looks like. As a physician, he has seen patients die in hospitals, hooked to morphine drips, and overcome with anxiety. He's watched dying drag on for weeks or months as terrified relatives stand by helplessly. Recently, however, his thoughts about how seriously ill people die have become personal. Swangard was diagnosed in 2013 with a rare form of metastatic cancer. To remove the cancer, surgeons took out parts of his pancreas and liver, as well as his entire spleen and gallbladder. The operation was successful, but Swangard knows there's a strong chance the disease will return. And if he gets to a point where there's nothing more medicine can do, he wants to be able to control where and when and how his life ends. That's why he joined a California lawsuit last month seeking to let doctors prescribe Yeah, I'm getting tongue-tied because this is just an upsetting thing. Lethal medications to certain patients who want to hasten death. That's what they're trying to get allowed here. If he were given only months to live, Swangard said he can't say for certain whether he would take them. The Right to Die movement has gained renewed momentum in California and around the nation following the highly publicized death of an East Bay woman with brain cancer. Brittany Maynard moved to Oregon to take advantage of its Death with Dignity law and died in November after taking a fatal dose of barbiturates prescribed by her doctor. The California suit asks the court to protect physicians from liability if they prescribe lethal medications to patients who are both terminally ill and mentally competent to decide their fate. The lawsuit argues that while it's against the law in California for anyone to assist in another's suicide, these cases are not suicide. Rather, the suit argues they are choices by a dying person on how his or her life should end, and decisions about one's own body protected under the state constitution. Separately, 2 California state senators have proposed a bill that would allow doctors to prescribe lethal medication to certain terminally ill adults. And I'm sure that if
Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. Whoa,
there's the names I was looking for. Yeah, I'm sure they're not the ones that they're proposing the bills, but they're probably giving it all their support. And they truly deserve the gavel on this one. I declare today's lawsuits across America case dismissed.
And your famous slow close.
So, when will people finally wake up to the fact that Dr. Kevorkian is dead? How many times do we have to pay for prisoners' benefits on the fringe? And how long has it been since I've cleaned out my refrigerator? Stay tuned for developments in our continuing battle against global socialism. And coming up in entertainment here, David Letterman is the focus of tonight's entertainment report. It's been, hold on. Here it is, out of the AP. U.S. Senator Al Franken has urged David Letterman to run for the U.S. Senate in the TV's host's native state of Indiana. Appearing on The Late Show on Wednesday for the first time since he went to Washington in 2009, Franken denounced Indiana's newly passed religious objections law that critics say sanctions discrimination against gays and lesbians. He suggested that his longtime friend could fill the seat being vacated by retiring Republican Senator Dan Coates. The audience applauded and Letterman shook his head. The Minnesota senator and Letterman are old friends stretching back to Franken's days as a writer and performer on SNL. Franken was a regular guest on Letterman's show in the 80s and 90s, but last appeared with them in 2008, and I'm sure there's reasons why, but I won't go into them because we don't have enough time. Opening up this weekend at the box office, Fast and Furious 7 with Vin Diesel and the late Paul Walker. It Follows is the name of the next one, with Maika Monroe and Keira Gilchrist. And Woman in Gold with Ryan Reynolds and Katie Holmes. About time we saw Katie Holmes in another film. Looks like she's finally gotten over Scientology. But at any rate, number one at the box office this week hit Home. As in, Home was number one with $52.1 million. And then Will Ferrell got Hard in second place with $33.8 million. And Insurgent slipped to third place at $21.5 million. That's your entertainment report for today. Hope to entertain you again tomorrow. Till then, I'm Corey Evan. Take it away, Jay.
Thank you very much, Corey. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the Evan Miller Report for this Thursday, April the 2nd, 2015. Coming up next, the National Weather Forecast with the BBC Met Office's Philip Avery. For Corey Evan and all of us here, we thank you for joining us. Coming up next, after the weather, the Exceptional Conservative Show with Tim Flynn. And make sure you join us tomorrow, where Orlene Curlow will join us to talk about the week's global socialism events. Good night, everybody.
Once again, we're heading into North America, and with good reason. There's a lot of weather going on, some weather not going on, and that's making the headlines too. Let's deal with the stuff that's actually happening. Quite a lot of moist air funneling its way out of the Gulf, and as a consequence, once it meets the cooler air coming in from across the border in Canada, this has made this particular frontal system very active indeed. And we've seen golf ball size hail, baseball size hail in one or two locations, some really damaging gusts of wind, and the threat of tornadoes as well as this whole system continues its journey ever further towards the east. Yet another set of fronts has come out of the North Pacific, delivering a fair amount of rain through Friday, down a good part of the western side of Canada, some snow at the higher levels there, and into the Pacific Northwest of the USA, yet more rainfall. Further south, that's where the weather isn't happening. There's no rain, there's no snow to report, just more heat, just more dry weather, which is why a number of restrictions have just been introduced into the area of California. Here, out towards the east, too much weather perhaps for some. Say torrential rains, damaging hail, some very gusty conditions, and that persistent threat of some tornadic outbreaks as well. But the thunderstorms in their own right are going to be violent enough. And it's still cold enough on the eastern side of Canada as we move towards the weekend. We're seeing a little bit of snow, perhaps the rain turning a bit more showery in the west as we get to the weekend.
Conservative media done right. You're listening to the SHR Media Network.